Auxiliaries Inspector, Lieutenant Commander John Letourneau, and today I'm going to walk you through how we do an seawater pump check. We're here on a DDG right now, but this will apply to other ships that have auxiliary seawater or auxiliary machinery cooling water. They're all very similar, so this should kind of walk you through the basic tenets of what we look for on these pump checks. The first thing we do, similar like the way we do the fire pump checks, is the first thing we like to do, like on ships that have remote operating suction valves, is we're going to operate the suction valve from, in this case it's hydraulic, so we're going to operate it from the MEVAC station remotely. The way we like to do that is we like to have them shut the valve remotely, and as they shut the valve, we're obviously going to watch for proper valve operation, indication, and we're going to check all the valve itself and the associated hydraulic valves, make sure the isolation valves are where they need to be, the bypass valves how it should be, and at the indication, your electrical wiring for your indicators and your indicators and your interlocks are proper. Make sure that there's no electrical safety check, electrical safety gates. In this case, we'll shut this valve, and the best way to check the suction interlock is to actually shut the valve remotely, and then we'll actually try and start the pump locally and from CCS, DDG, so there's two places to start this pump, local and CCS. We'll try them both. The pump shouldn't start, obviously. If the pump does start, we'll secure it right away. That means we have a problem with this interlock, and that's an RBO. So we're going to make sure that we check those before we come out. But once we check the interlock, the suction interlock, we'll open this valve remotely from the MEVAC station, and then we'll shut the discharge valve. Now the discharge valve on a DDG for aux seawater is a remote operating valve. Shut the discharge valve, and while we're shutting these valves, we're checking for proper indication at the MEVAC station and at CCS, and we're checking that your linkage, this is your indication, and your interlock linkage is proper, and the wiring, you don't have any open stuffing tubes or freight wires or anything like that. So we're checking all that stuff. Even though it's an auxiliaries check, we're still looking at the electrical stuff too. We'll check for proper operation of the valve, and then we'll go ahead and try and start the pump from each location. Obviously the pump shouldn't start. Once the interlock is checked, the operator will open this valve, then we're ready to start the pump. First thing we want to do is start the pump locally. So we'll have the operator place the pump in local, start the pump. Once the pump starts, then we're going to check all the basic things we normally check for operation of the pump. We're going to check the suction pressure, the discharge pressure. We're going to check for proper rotation, and we're going to check for leaks, and we're obviously going to, and even before we start, we're actually going to check this motor controller, make sure the motor controller is intact, make sure these wires, there's no open stuffing tubes, and there's no safety hits on this motor controller. We check all that stuff before we typically start. The other thing, like the fire pump, we're also going to check the motor terminal junction box. It's over here in this case. We're going to check the box itself, make sure it's tight, and we're going to check the electrical lead, make sure that the electrical lead is intact, secure, and there's no electrical safety hits. When I'm checking the resilient mounts, this thing's on a foundation and it's got resilient mounts. I like to give the pump a grab, and I actually like to move the pump. And that checks two things. That checks the mounts themselves, and that checks for any shock hits that we have, any metal-to-metal contact, or any spacing issues that we have. So we check all that with one simple check. So once we start this pump, like I said, suction pressure, discharge pressure, we're going to check the gauges themselves, and we're going to check the proper operating pressures. With the gauges, we like to check the isolation valves, these hope valves, make sure they're not seized. And a lot of seawater systems, especially auxiliary seawater systems, these don't get a lot of love, so these get seized real easily. So some of the best maintenance you can do is just operate them from time to time. Just partially closed, partially open, keep them loose, keep them lubricated. So we're going to check our calibration on our gauges, make sure that they're within periodicity. In this case, they've got the CRL labels. That's good. The calibration labels are within periodicity. That's good. We're going to check for leaks on the gauges themselves and the gauge lines. So we do all that. And then the other thing I like to do is I like to check the root valves too, because the root valves are similar to the isolation valves. They don't get a lot of love, and from time to time we find those seized. So, like this one, I would shut down a couple turns and then open it a couple turns, just to make sure that the valve's not seized. We find a lot of those seized, especially on the older ships. Make sure that the grounding straps are intact and that they're tight. So once we start the pump, do all these checks, and we'll check for leaks too. We'll get under these flanges, check for leaks. Get under this lagging, check for leaks. The other thing I like to do is, just like on the fire pumps, I like to get my magnet out, and I like to check for ferrous fasteners. We find those a lot, especially on the older ships. In this case, these are all non-ferrous fasteners. In a non-ferrous system, that's the way we want them. For all these material conditions, we check our interlocks, we check our valve indications at each location. Obviously, things like pump running lights, we want to make sure that those work when the pump's running and that they secure when the pump's off. We're going to check for proper rotation. We're also going to check when we secure the pump. We're going to check for reverse rotation. Make sure that that check valve's not leaking by. In this case, it's on this ship, DDG, the check valve does not have an indicator. So we like to try and check for some check valve slamming or some check valve noise. Make sure that that's seating properly. That's another thing we like to look for. So once we get done with all these checks, material condition of this pump, and we're satisfied, then we'll move on to the next pump. Now what we like to do, if possible, it's at ship's discretion of course, is we like to do the fire pump and the oxy-water pump checks together. And we know that typically mixes some work centers, but if the ship can support it, it makes it go a lot faster, because we typically have all three inspectors that do these checks for auxiliaries, and if you can utilize us in the most efficient way, start at the most forward fire pump or oxy-water pump, just work your way aft or work your way forward, and just knock them all out. That's the best way to do it. That way we can move on to other checks, and we're a lot more successful that way. This concludes my auxiliary seawater pump check, and I hope you learned something here. Thank you.